So, let's talk about Westminster Abbey. Now, this isn't just another famous old building. It's more like a thousand-year-old storybook for an entire nation, holding the memories of its most famous figures and its most humble. The question is, what secrets are actually held within those walls?
Well, you might be surprised to hear that they all share the same final resting place. But how did this one single church become the grand stage for royal coronations, the tomb for national heroes, and a symbol for an entire empire? That's the story we're going to unpack right now.
Okay, first things first, let's clear up something that confuses a lot of people. Despite its name, Westminster Abbey is not a cathedral. You see, a cathedral has a bishop. An abbey is traditionally a home for monks. But the abbey hasn't actually been a monastery for centuries. So, what is it?
Let's get really specific here. On one hand, you have Westminster Abbey. It's Anglican, built in that classic soaring Gothic style. Then, just down the road, you've got its much younger neighbor, Westminster Cathedral. That's the main Catholic church in England, and it's built from brick in this really striking Byzantine style. They're two completely different buildings with two very different stories.
The Abbey's real status is something incredibly unique. It's what's known as a royal peculiar. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically, it doesn't answer to any bishop or archbishop. It belongs directly to the reigning monarch, and that direct link to the crown, well, that's the key to its entire history.
And that history all begins with this guy, King Edward the Confessor. Way back in the 1040s, he had this grand vision for a magnificent new church right next to his palace. He wanted to build a place that was truly fit for royal ceremonies, the religious heart of his kingdom.
You know, Edward wasn't your typical battle-hardened king. He was deeply, deeply pious, a man of great prayer. In fact, he's often described as being more of a monk than a monarch. His faith was the real driving force behind this incredible church, which he dedicated in 1065, literally just days before he died.
And of course, legends quickly grew up around him. One of the most famous is the miracle of the ring. The story goes that Edward, finding himself without any coins, gave his own ring to a beggar. Years and years later, that very same ring was returned by a mysterious old man in the Holy Land who turned out to be St. John the Evangelist himself, and he had a message. Edward would be joining him in heaven in just 6 months.
So, after Edward's death, the incredible abbey that he built immediately took on what is probably its most famous role. It became the official coronation theater of the nation.
And, I mean, immediately, just 1 year after it was dedicated, William the Conqueror was crowned here in 1066 to try and legitimize his claim to the English throne. And ever since then, almost every single English and British monarch has been crowned right here. That's nearly 1,000 years of continuous history, all happening in one building.
And at the very heart of that ancient ceremony is this object, the coronation chair. It was commissioned by King Edward I to house a very important piece of war booty, the Stone of Scone. This was the ancient coronation seat of Scottish kings, which he seized back in 1296.
This simple oak chair has just endured so much history. It's actually the oldest dated piece of English furniture made by a known artist. But for centuries, it wasn't exactly well protected. Tourists would pay a guard to let them sit in it, and Westminster schoolboys famously carved their initials all over the wood.
The 19th century architect Sir Gilbert Scott summed it up perfectly. He called it a magnificent work of art, but one that had been, in his words, sadly mutilated by time and, well, by people.
And its history isn't just one of quiet decay, no way. In 1914, it was thrust right into the middle of a national conflict when a bomb, likely planted by suffragettes, exploded and shattered one of its corners. It's just this powerful reminder that the objects inside the Abbey aren't just relics, they are participants in history, just like the people buried there.
Because you see, the Abbey is so much more than just a place for crowning kings and queens. Over time, it evolved into the nation's most prestigious, most honored final resting place.
Just think about that number for a second. Over 3,300 people. The Abbey is basically a crowded city of the dead, a complete who's who of British history.
It all started, of course, with royalty. Edward the Confessor was buried in his own church, and other monarchs followed. That includes famous rivals like Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots, who, in a twist of irony, lie near each other in the very same chapel.
But then, the honors started to expand. It actually began with Geoffrey Chaucer, who was buried here not because he was a famous poet, but because he was a royal clerk who happened to live at the Abbey.
But his tomb became a focal point, and soon the nation's greatest writers and artists were being buried or memorialized all around him in what we now call Poets' Corner.
And the Abbey's evolution is just remarkable. It even made room for people who challenged religious beliefs. I mean, the burials of Sir Isaac Newton and, yes, Charles Darwin turned the Abbey into a kind of temple of science. And Stephen Hawking's ashes were interred right between them in 2018.
By the late 1800s, the Abbey had become so crowded with national figures that the writer William Morris gave it the perfect name, a national Valhalla. You know, like the great Hall of Heroes from Norse mythology.
And yet, among all these kings, queens, poets, and scientists, the single most sacred and revered tomb in the entire Abbey belongs to someone with no name at all.
Just one person representing millions. In 1920, the body of one unidentified soldier was brought back from the battlefields of France. He was chosen completely at random to represent all those who died in the Great War and never had a known grave. He is the unknown warrior.
The inscription on his tomb says it all. He was buried among the most illustrious of the land because he and the millions he represents gave everything. It's the one grave in the entire Abbey that no one is ever allowed to walk on, and royal brides, starting with the future Queen Mother, leave their bouquets here as a mark of profound respect.
From a crowned monk to an unknown soldier, the Abbey tells the story of what a nation chooses to honor, who it chooses to remember. And that leaves us with a final thought. If we were to build a national shrine like this today, who would we choose to put inside?